Hello and welcome to BingeBot, where we break down all the latest and greatest TV shows to help keep you in the loop. Today we're bracing for a trip to Europe ripe with the undead, as we recap Season 1 of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, as he makes an unexpected trip to France amid the zombie apocalypse. Let's uncover the continuation of Daryl's story and dive right in, starting with Episode 1, La Main Perdue. Having left his home in the United States a few weeks prior on an exploration quest, Daryl Dixon has apparently faced very unfortunate circumstances that have somehow resulted in him crossing the Atlantic Ocean and finding himself washed ashore on the beaches of France. After regaining his strength, Daryl begins to traverse the streets near Marseille, finding them deserted due to the viral outbreak that causes people who die to reanimate as mindless, relentless, decayed creatures known as walkers. As Daryl spends days moving from one abandoned house to another and gathering supplies, he eventually runs into a young woman named Maribel and her grandfather, Guillaume. While this was initially a peaceful encounter, things take a turn with the arrival of two guerriers, who are soldiers from the militant organization Pouvoir des Vivants, or Power of the Living. At first, Daryl follows the soldiers' commands, but when one of them, Michel, puts his hands on Maribel, Daryl pulls out a knife and delivers a lethal stab to the other guerrier's throat. In retaliation, Michel tries to shoot Daryl, but Maribel strikes him on the head before fatally driving a spear into his chest. Although Daryl might have just saved Maribel's life, his help backfires as Guillaume takes advantage of Daryl's injuries and hits him on the head with his cane. As he begins to lose consciousness, Daryl faintly watches as Maribel and Guillaume steal all of his items and flee. Fortunately, right before he passes out completely, Daryl catches a glimpse of a woman approaching, hoping that she'd help him. A few hours later, Daryl wakes up in a bed and is met by the woman that he saw, a nun named Isabelle Carrier, who brought him to the Abbey of St. Bernadette, where she and the other nuns treat his wounds. Wanting to put Daryl's mind at ease, Isabelle explains that the Abbey is part of a larger network of religious communities across France, known as the Union of Hope, who are all committed to protecting themselves from the walkers. Meanwhile, as Maribel and Guillaume enjoy the spoils of their robbery, they're intercepted by another guerrier, Stéphane Caudron, who asks if they've seen his younger brother, Michel. Initially, Maribel feigns ignorance, but when Stéphane brutally kills Guillaume by thrusting his cane into his skull, she becomes horrified and takes Stéphane back to where Michel met his end. Upon discovering that Michel was killed and turned into a walker, Stéphane is devastated, and after stabbing his brother in the head to ensure that he stays dead this time, Stéphane turns to Maribel and demands to know who did this to his brother. Knowing that Stéphane would show her no mercy if she admitted that it was her, Maribel lies and claims that Michel was murdered by an American man that she encountered, leading Stéphane to swear vengeance against that man. As a gesture of hospitality, Isabelle gives Daryl a tour of the Abbey, showing him their weapons room and telling him about her nephew, Laurent, who she and the other nuns have cared for, as his mother died during childbirth and they don't know who his father is. According to Isabelle, Laurent's no ordinary child. In fact, the Union of Hope believes him to be the Messiah who's destined to revive humanity. Understandably, Daryl's a bit skeptical about Laurent really being the Messiah, and while he's grateful that the nuns have treated him, he has no interest in their religious beliefs, and decides to leave the Abbey, determined to find a way back home. As soon as he leaves, however, he notices a fleet of guerrier vehicles driving towards the Abbey, indicating that the nuns might be in need of his help. Once Stéphane and his men force their way into the Abbey, he begins to question the nuns if they've seen an American man. Aware that the guerriers are always looking for trouble, the nuns choose not to reveal that the American man that he's searching for was just with them. This doesn't deter Stéphane, however, as once he discovers that the nuns are hiding a boy in the Abbey, he insists on taking him to recruit him into the guerriers. Unsurprisingly, Isabelle staunchly refuses, and even slaps one of the men who tries to take Laurent from her. In response, the man nearly strikes Isabelle with his rifle, but thankfully, Daryl appears just in time, plunging a spear into the man's back and instantly igniting a vicious fight between the guerriers and the unexpectedly well-armed nuns. As the battle rages in the courtyard, Stéphane chases Daryl inside the Abbey, having figured out that he's the American man who supposedly murdered his brother. Once Stéphane catches up to Daryl, a brutal bout of combat ensues, with Stéphane pinning Daryl against a wall and delivering powerful blows to his stomach, before throwing him to the ground, ready to shoot. Luckily, just as Stéphane's about to pull the trigger, Isabelle arrives, knocking the gun out of his hand, allowing Daryl to seize it and chase Stéphane outside. When Daryl returns to the courtyard, he discovers that most of the guerriers and the nuns have ended up massacring each other, leaving only 3 survivors besides himself: Isabelle, Laurent, and Sylvie, a young nun who's like an older sister to Laurent. After holding a pyre to honor the fallen, Isabelle decides that they must leave the Abbey, recognizing that it is no longer safe. Understanding that Isabelle wants to find a new safe spot, Daryl promises to bring her to another community of the Union, but in return, she must help him secure a boat to take him back to the United States. Episode 2. Alouette. Having reached an agreement, Daryl and the group leave the Abbey, only to find themselves under attack once again. This time, it's a gang of road bandits firing arrows at them and prompting Daryl to chase them, which doesn't end well for him as he's eventually ambushed by the bandits, who turn out to be just a few children. After restraining Daryl, the children take him and the group to an abandoned school that they've turned into a sanctuary, where they're met by Lou, the leader of these young bandits. Thankfully, once Isabel clarifies that they come in peace, Lou decides to trust them and even invites them in for a meal, during which she informs Daryl that she knows where they can get a horse, which would allow them to travel faster. However, acquiring the horse won't be an easy task, as it's owned by a depraved man named R.J. Gaines, who's imprisoned and even killed some of the children. Despite the obvious danger, Daryl decides to head to the castle where Gaines has taken refuge, and while exploring, he hears the cries of a boy that Gaines is holding captive. As Daryl tries to free the boy, who's nicknamed Hedgehog, their escape's interrupted as Gaines notices them and opens fire. Thinking quick, Daryl hands Hedgehog his rifle and instructs him to shoot at Gaines to distract him, while Daryl sneaks up from behind, disarming and capturing Gaines. With Gaines tied up, Daryl and Hedgehog take the horse and load up the wagon with gas tanks. Unfortunately, the tanks prove too heavy for the wagon and end up tumbling down into the castle's moat, which is teeming with walkers. To make matters worse, as Daryl tries to fix the wagon, Gaines seizes the opportunity to attack him, leading to a fight that results in Daryl falling into the moat and Gaines finding himself hanging right in front of the walkers, who immediately begin devouring him. Using his new weapon, a medieval flail that he took down from the Abbey, Daryl skillfully decapitates several walkers before using his rifle to blow up a gas tank. As the smoke clears, Daryl's relieved to find that the children have secretly followed him and are firing arrows at the remaining walkers while also tossing him down a rope, allowing him to climb up to safety. After loading up the supplies that Gaines was hoarding, they head back to the school, where all the children celebrate now they have all the resources that they need to live securely for the foreseeable future. With the horse and carriage, Daryl and his three companions continue their journey, but as they leave the school, Daryl and Laurent bond over their shared beliefs that Laurent is probably just a normal kid, and not the Messiah like everyone keeps thinking. Overhearing this, Isabel reminds herself why she holds the belief in the first place. During the early days of the outbreak, Isabel and her sister Lily arrived at the Abbey, desperate for help as Lily was in labor. Tragically, Lily had been bitten, causing her to die and turn to a walker just moments before giving birth. Yet, despite Lily's reanimation, Laurent was born completely healthy, an extraordinary event that Isabel and the other nuns regarded as a miracle from God, convincing them that Laurent was the Messiah. Episode 3. Paris sera toujours Paris. After days of travel, Daryl and the group arrive in Paris, where they run into another group that's part of the Union, led by a man named Philou Bouquer. Once Isabel explains that they're from the Abbey of St. Bernadette, Philou instantly recognizes that this must mean that Laurent is the Messiah, compelling him to welcome them into his community. To assure them that they're safe here, Philou takes them to their sanctuary, showing them that they have everything they need, food, weapons, and numbers, to protect them against any enemies. Believing that she's found a safe place, Isabel informs Daryl that she's now ready to help him return home. To accomplish this, Philou takes them to a vibrant nightclub where they intend to meet its wealthy owner, who has the means to get Daryl a boat to take him home. Regrettably, this plan ends up causing more trouble as the club owner turns out to be Quinn, Isabel's ex-boyfriend from before the outbreak, making her realize that this encounter won't go as smoothly as she'd hoped, knowing that Quinn always prioritizes his own interests. Complicating matters further, when Isabel introduces Laurent to Quinn, explaining that he's Lily's son, Quinn's taken aback for some reason. Once he's alone with Isabel and Daryl, that reason becomes clear, as Quinn reveals that he had a brief affair with Lily months before her death, which means that he is Laurent's father.
I had a son. What are you talking about? A boy should know his dad, shouldn't he?
While trying to process this revelation, Daryl and Isabel argue about whether or not they should tell Laurent the truth, especially since Isabel has been deceiving him for years, telling him that his father was a hero who died fighting the walkers. This argument proves futile, however, as Laurent reveals that he's been eavesdropping the entire time, causing him to become enraged by all the lies that he's been told, and he runs away. Before they can follow him, though, the club is suddenly invaded by guerriers, forcing Daryl and Isabel to make a hasty escape. Episode 4. Les Dames de Fer. The following day, while Daryl and Isabel are relieved that they've escaped safely, they're still concerned for Laurent, wondering where he ran off to. Remembering that Laurent's always wanted to visit the Eiffel Tower, Daryl and Isabel rush there, only to find him being kidnapped by Quinn's men, who are forcing him into a car, planning to take him back to the nightclub. While Daryl fails to rescue Laurent, he does manage to pull out one of the kidnappers before the car speeds off. And with the kidnapper, Armand, restrained, Daryl begins to interrogate him, seeking a way to infiltrate Quinn's nightclub and forcing Armand to reveal that there's a secret tunnel that leads into the club. Using Armand as his guide, Daryl navigates the dark tunnels, where he finds himself being chased by walkers, prompting him to ask Armand for exact directions before leaving him behind to his death. Once Daryl reaches the secret door to Quinn's room, he finds Laurent with Anna, Quinn's girlfriend, who pulls a gun on him, as she's been ordered to never let Laurent leave. However, having bonded with Laurent, Anna decides to let him go, knowing that he'd be happier with Daryl and Isabel. Once they escape the club, Daryl and Laurent meet Isabel and Falou by the river. Recognizing that Paris is too dangerous for Laurent, Falou decides the only truly safe place for him would be the Union's main base, known as the Nest, which is located in Normandy. Unfortunately, while Falou's arranged for a boat that will take them to the Nest, he's received news that the Guerriers have blocked all of the river routes. Realizing that they need someone with money and influence to get the Guerriers to let the boat through, Isabel decides they must return to Quinn, knowing that he'd do this for her if she agrees to be with him again. Due to this, Laurent's forced to say goodbye to Isabel and Sylvie for the first time in his life as he boards the boat with Daryl, who's now tasked with bringing him to the Nest safely. Episode 5. Deux Amours. As he enjoys some quiet time during the river trip, Daryl takes a moment to reflect on how he ended up in France to begin with. After leaving his home community, the Commonwealth, on an exploration quest, Daryl arrives in Maine, where he encounters a group of men with an unusual job for him, asking him to capture as many walkers as he can in exchange for gas for his motorcycle. At first, Daryl's hunting skills serve him well, allowing him to catch an impressive number of walkers each day. Things take a turn for the worse though when Daryl violates the group's rules by getting into a fight with another member who killed one of the younger hunters Daryl was starting to bond with. As a result, Daryl finds himself imprisoned on the ship that transports the captured walkers across the Atlantic Ocean to France, where they're experimented on by the Pouvoir des Vivants. Realizing that this won't end well if he doesn't act soon, Daryl decides to trick the ship's guards into thinking that he's been infected by pretending to cough up blood. And fearing that Daryl might spread the infection, the guards remove him from his cell, intending to throw him into a pit filled with walkers. Just as the guards are about to toss him in though, he surprises them with a series of punches and throws them into the pit instead. Knowing more guards are coming, Daryl hastily opens all of the prisoners' cells, allowing them to escape, create chaos, and even start a fire on the ship.
Nous sommes accrochés à la vie.
You son of a bitch! You did it! Well,
And once he finds a lifeboat, Daryl releases it into the water and leaps into it, just as a massive explosion erupts on the ship. In the present, things aren't much better. After spending the night in the woods, Daryl wakes to find the Guerriers have somehow discovered their location and started searching the area, eventually finding and capturing both Daryl and Laurent. Back in Paris, Isabel accompanies Quinn on a visit to the Pouvoir's headquarters, having been invited by the leader of the Pouvoir herself, Marianne Genet, who's promised them a lavish event. Upon arrival, however, they're escorted to the cell block, where Genet reveals that the real reason for the invitation is that she's discovered Quinn bribed one of her Guerriers to allow Daryl and Laurent to pass through. As Quinn grapples with how Genet could have found out, the answer becomes clear with the appearance of Anna, who's decided to expose him out of jealousy for choosing Isabel over her. Consequently, Isabel is helpless as Quinn's thrown into a cell, only to become more worried when she finds Daryl held in another. But before she panics about what happened to Laurent, Isabel's taken to Genet's office, where she finds Laurent unharmed. Having reunited, Isabel and Laurent are taken to the stands of a packed battle arena, where they watch as Daryl's thrust into the center, faced against a walker. Normally, Daryl would easily defeat the walker, but the situation's changed when it's injected with the Pouvoir's enhancing chemicals, making it much more vicious, all while the crowd roars, eager to watch a gruesome spectacle. Episode 6. Coming Home. As soon as the walker is unleashed, it charges at Daryl, who skillfully dodges its attacks and eventually grabs a flag from the wall, using it to pierce the walker's stomach and slam it to the ground before planting the flag in its head. In the next round, Quinn's brought in and he and Daryl are chained together by the wrists. Suddenly, the lights dim and spotlights reveal that they're encircled by 4 enhanced walkers. Fortunately, 2 of the enhanced walkers begin to malfunction. One's head explodes while the others attack and kill one of its own, leaving Daryl and Quinn with only 2 walkers to fight. Using the chain between them, Daryl and Quinn begin to trip the walkers, creating an opportunity for Quinn to take his hammer and deliver several crushing blows to the skull of one of them. Right after, the second walker lunges at Quinn, knocking him to the ground, only for Daryl to quickly wrap the chain around the walker's neck, straining it with every ounce of his strength until the walker's head finally snaps off and tumbles onto the floor, a feat so impressive that the crowd erupts into enthusiastic chants of Daryl's name. Angered by Daryl's victory, Janae orders her guerriers to just shoot him and get it over with. But thankfully, just as the guerriers are about to open fire, Falu's group launches a surprise counterattack, giving Daryl and Quinn the chance to escape the arena. Upon realizing that he'd been infected during the battle and is going to die soon, Quinn makes the agonizing decision to let Daryl amputate his hand to separate them from each other, which allowed Daryl to find Isabel and Laurent and save them. With one powerful strike, Daryl severs Quinn's hand, causing him excruciating pain, but despite his suffering, Quinn grabs a knife and fights off the approaching walkers, buying Daryl enough time to find Isabel, Laurent, and Sylvie and escape the building. Wasting no time, the group takes a jeep and drives towards the nest, but tragically, the respite is short-lived as the guerriers, including Stefan, ambush them.
Looking for this?
With the chance to prove himself as a cold-hearted killer, Stefan brandishes his gun, ready to execute the entire group, deciding to start with Laurent. Instead of pleading for his life, Laurent remains calm and chooses to leave Stefan with the simple words, "God loves you." These words seem to strike a chord with Stefan, who, in a sudden change of heart, turns his gun on the other guerriers, shooting down every single one of them. Afterwards, Stefan points the gun at Daryl, but instead of pulling the trigger, he declares that he'll spare his life today, promising he won't be so merciful next time. Once back in Janae's office, Stefan attempts to convince her that Daryl's group overpowered him and his fellow guerriers, leaving him as the sole survivor as he was able to escape. However, Janae, always perceptive, can tell that Stefan's lying, prompting her to throw him in a jail, intending to make him suffer for betraying her. Now that they're out of danger, Daryl and the group finally arrive at the nest, finding it to be a majestic island adorned with medieval structures and a thriving community that greets them with excitement. The leader of the nest and the Union Hope as a whole, Losang also happens to be an American, and reassures Daryl that they're safe in the nest, promising that they'll be prepared if the guerriers launch an attack. After spending a few days at the nest, Daryl sees that Isabel, Laurent, and Sylvie are all well cared for, with plenty of activities to keep them engaged like playing, cooking, studying, and learning how to fight. Feeling that his mission is complete, Daryl prepares to take on a boat that Losang has arranged for him, which will take him to the Canadian island of Newfoundland, and from there, he'll be able to continue his journey back to the US. After a full day's hike, Daryl finally reaches the meeting spot on the beach, just as the boat arrives. Overjoyed at the thought of returning home, he rushes towards the boat when suddenly, he hears a familiar voice calling his name.
Daryl!
Turning around, Daryl sees Laurent, who'd secretly followed him, and is now surrounded by a herd of walkers. Understanding that Laurent doesn't want him to leave as he now sees him as both a friend and a father figure, Daryl's torn between the two choices of boarding the boat and returning home to the Commonwealth, or staying with Laurent and embracing the nest as his new home. Meanwhile, back in the US, Daryl's friends have already started taking action to find out why he hasn't returned yet. This is evident in what takes place near Freeport, Maine, where a biker riding Daryl's motorcycle notices a car suddenly appearing behind him. Realizing that he's being chased, the biker halts and shoots at the car, forcing the driver to step out, revealing herself to be none other than Carol, Daryl's best friend, who left the Commonwealth to come search for him. Pretending to comply, Carol allows the biker to rummage through her car, only to unveil a hidden wrench up her sleeve and knocks him out with it. Once he regains consciousness, the biker finds himself tied up in the trunk, with Carol aiming his own shotgun at him, demanding an explanation for how he came into possession of her friend's motorcycle. Now powerless, the biker admits that he simply traded for the motorcycle with some guys down the road. Armed with this information, Carol shuts the trunk, telling the biker that she'll return to release him only if he's telling the truth, before mounting the motorcycle and riding off to find those guys who sold it to him, determined to follow the trail until she reaches Daryl. And that brings us to the end of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 1. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, consider sharing the video with a friend or dropping us a like, and if you want to see more recaps on the latest and greatest TV shows, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new video. We'll be back with another recap soon, but until then, BingeBot is logging off.